Director of the Levin Center at Wayne Law. I am so glad that you have joined us today for a panel discussion entitled The Detroit Police Commission, Past and Present, Detroit's Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement in Historical Context. We at the Levin Center are very pleased to be partnering with the Damon J. Center for Civil Rights and its director, Peter Hammer, in bringing this panel discussion to you. I will serve as the panel's moderator, and Peter will provide closing remarks. Before saying a bit about the program, I wanted to briefly tell you about the mission of the Levin Center and why we thought it was a good idea to bring forward the topic of the Detroit Police Commission and how civilian oversight of the police has played out in Detroit. Upon his retirement in 2015 from the U.S. Senate, Senator Carl Levin established the Levin Center at Wayne State University's law school with a mission to advance bipartisan, fact-based oversight and civil discourse. Now, yes, there are many of you, I think, probably that think or doubt that such things go on in the halls of Congress, but rest assured, every day, legislators and staff on Capitol Hill and in state capitals across the country are engaged in bipartisan, fact-based oversight. But too often, lawmakers from opposing parties struggle to agree on even the basic facts, and that makes constructive debate and legislation nearly impossible. It also makes it hard to hold the executive branch and big institutions like banks and tech companies accountable. So at the Levin Center, we say that facts are not red, they're not blue, they're just facts. And they are the foundation of our democracy. Without investigations that are credible, there can be no rule of law, no checks and balances, no transparency, and no accountability. So today, as we discuss civilian oversight of the police, we are affirming the power of facts and the right of every citizen to hold a light up to the institutions that govern and shape society, including the police department. So how do we assess the Detroit Police Commission? How has this experiment in civilian oversight of the police performed over the last 4 decades? What does that history have to tell us about its ability to tackle issues such as facial recognition technology, racial profiling, and the use of force by police? How can a civilian oversight body led by volunteers meet these challenging issues, especially at a time when our country and communities struggle to come together and incivility and tribalism seem to crowd out the common good? Fortunately, we have with us today an outstanding group of panelists who will help us get at these questions and engage in civil discourse on issues about which there are very strong feelings. And we are thrilled to have a couple of hundred people watching. The first 100 who checked in today are with us via Zoom, and the remainder are watching via YouTube. Our Zoom participants may use both the chat function to comment, but we ask you, if you want to submit questions, to use Zoom's question button at the bottom of the screen. Those watching via YouTube may submit questions as well. I will do my best to get to all of these questions, but our time is limited, so I may combine some similar questions that overlap with each other into one. And it's possible that I won't get to absolutely all of the questions, but I will do my very, very best. Our program is as follows. I will provide welcoming remarks as I've done. We'll have opening comments from Senator Carl Levin. Then we'll hear from our 3 panelists, Judge Avern Cohn, Police Commissioner Evette Griffie, and Tawana Petty. We'll then have a discussion in Q&A, and Peter Hammer from the Key Center will wrap things up with closing remarks. So now to kick things off, I want to introduce our opening speaker, Senator Carl Levin. Carl Levin is a lifelong Detroiter attorney, former president of the Detroit City Council, and a member of the U.S. Senate, where he was Michigan's longest serving senator, serving from 1979 until 2015. He now chairs the Levin Center, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Senator Carl Levin. Carl, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Jim, and it's great to have you as our director. And hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be with you today to discuss civilian oversight of law enforcement, a topic which has been a significant concern for decades in this community and around the country, but one which has taken on tremendous current importance. I can think of no more fitting place to host this forum than Wayne State University Law School. This law school was quite literally present at creation, appointed, when Detroit embraced the concept of civilian oversight of its police department. Because one of the 5 original members of the commission, appointed by Mayor Coleman Young, was a Wayne Law professor who is, I know, with us today, named Ed Littlejohn. The Detroit Police Commission was founded after the residents of Detroit in 1974 approved an amendment to the city charter that established the commission. I was president of the Detroit City Council at the time, and I worked with Mayor Coleman Young and my colleagues on the council to secure approval of that charter to authorize the commission. The police commission, in many ways, is a metaphor for Detroit's history over the last 60 years. Serious concerns about discrimination against African Americans, segregation, and abusive practices by the police had been growing for decades in Detroit and across the country. The 1967 rebellion in Detroit was sparked by a police raid on an after-hours drinking establishment on the city's west side, in which 3 Black teenagers were killed at the Algiers Motel, and nearly 10 other people were wounded, but none of the police perpetrators were found guilty. In this environment, the Detroit Police Commission came into being. Detroit became one of the first large cities in America to establish a civilian oversight body with robust powers to oversee the behavior of the police department and its members, with the ability to gather evidence and subpoena witnesses and to pass judgment on the allegations of misconduct of officers. Placing such significant powers in the hands of a group of civilians was a sea change. It was a response to terrible injustices and a lack of transparency and accountability that allowed those injustices to continue for decades. But the Detroit Police Commission was not a panacea. While things have been improved somewhat in our country since 1974, many of the concerns that I recited earlier that led to the creation of the Detroit Police Commission are still with us. But that does not mean that civilian oversight of the police has failed, but the system in which the Police Commission operates is not yet producing the results that we want and are needed. The question we are here today to explore is this: knowing the history of Detroit and its police commission, how can the system be improved? What role should the police commission play in addressing problems, whether it's racial profiling or the use of force when other means could address the situation in a nonviolent fashion, or the other related problems? I'm honored as the chair of the Levin Center to partner with our friends at the Damon Center on Civil Rights and its director, Peter Hammer, to present this panel discussion on the police commission's past and present, and what should we do about its future as we look to address concerns about oversight of the police department. We have an extraordinary panel gathered this afternoon, and I wish we could all be together, but that's not to be. It should be a great discussion, and I'm sure that many who are watching via the internet will have a lot of questions and thoughts that will make our dialogue that much richer. With that, I will turn things back to Jim Townsend, our moderator, and thank you all again for joining us.
Thank you, Carl, so much for joining us and for providing those wonderful remarks. I'm now going to turn it over to our panelists, and I'm going to begin with Judge Avern Cohn. Judge Avern Cohn is one of America's most distinguished and longest serving jurists, having served as a federal judge from the Eastern District of Michigan from 1979 until his retirement earlier this year. Judge Cohn, or Avern as he insists on being called these days, served our community, state, and country in numerous other ways, from his service in the United States Army during World War II, to his chairing of the Michigan Civil Rights Commission, and his chairing of the Detroit Police Commission. We are honored to welcome Judge Cohn and look forward to his comments. Judge Cohn, take it away, please.
When you're looking at the police commission, you've got to remember how it evolved. Prior to 1974, the police department was headed by a single commissioner who was the citizen supervisor of the department. The 1974 charter, as Senator Levin told you, changed it to a 5-member commission to enhance accountability of the department and a department responsive to diverse people and interests in the community. The 1974 charter provided the police department shall preserve, the police department is headed by a 5-member board of police commissioners. The board shall, in consultation with the chief of police and with the approval of the mayor, establish policies, rules, and regulations. That language was changed in the 2012 charter to read, the Board of Police Commissioners has supervisory control and oversight of the department as set forth in this charter. There is one great flaw in that language. While the commissioners are supposed to be the managers of the department, they do not appoint the chief of police. The mayor appoints the chief of police. And in my experience, the management structure of the department. The 1997 and 2012 charters included the commission with essentially the same powers as the 74 charter. However, the 2012 charter has a provision for 11 members, 4 selected by the mayor and 7 elected from districts. And I must tell you, in my personal view, having a board of directors of 11 members is not conducive to effective management, particularly where the chief consults with the department, but he essentially makes the decision. An explanation of the change described in this was described in the 2012 charter by the Citizen Research Council, and it says, The change provided supervisory control and oversight of a paramilitary operation. And that is exactly what the police department is. It's a paramilitary organization designed to protect the safety of the citizens. And having a 11-member commission who doesn't appoint the man responsible for the management of the department isn't conducive to effective management. In 1999, David Smidra, a former executive secretary of the department, wrote a detailed analysis of the work of the commission. Smidra's paper is the only detailed study of the commission I have seen. In my personal view, gained solely from reading the newspapers and some experiences I had as a judge, I believe that the commission effectively exercises very little authority and is not particularly well regarded in the community. This is illustrated by the following. The monitorship of the city, of the department, by the Department of Justice for almost 15 years, as well as the judge overseeing the monitor's work, completely ignored the commission. There's not a mention of the commission in the history of that monitorship. More recently, a lawsuit in federal court challenging the operation of the department made no mention of the commission. Likewise, Representative Talib's letter asking for a public meeting regarding the department's practices made no mention of the commission. It's not well known, but the department does have a regulation regarding use of force, and the department does have a regulation regarding reporting uses of force. Now, most recently, City Council got into the act in considering the department's request for money to have a facial recognition software. And there was a great debate in front of the City Council about this. Nowhere is it particularly mentioned that the Police Commission approved using facial recognition software. After great debate, when it got to the council, apparently, according to the newspapers, that debate started all over again. In the Citizens Research Council commentary on the adoption of the 2012 charter, it said as follows. Role of commission blurred by collective bargaining agreement, varying interpretations of role, importantly, personalities of mayor, police chiefs, and commission members. The commission blurs responsibilities of mayor. Having a commission blurs the responsibilities of the mayor and city council. Now, I conclude my remarks by saying, this is a personal view from a distance, having left the commission more than 40 years ago, that having a board of directors, 4 of whom are appointed by the mayor and therefore accountable to the mayor, and 7 elected at large, doesn't make for effective management and doesn't make for an effective management of the police department. As far as I can tell, the department does a very good job. Police Chief Craig is doing an excellent job, and learned hand set of patent lawyers in patent litigation, they were a burdensome impertinence. And I think if you got an honest account from the mayor or the chief of police, they would tell you that the commission is a burdensome impertinence. Thank you.
Thank you, Avern, for those comments. I'd now like to turn the panel over to Yvette Griffey. Yvette Griffey is a member of the Detroit Police Commission representing District 2, a position she was appointed to by Mayor Duggan back in 2018. Yvette is a lifelong Detroiter, proud product of Detroit Public Schools, and a graduate of the University of Michigan. She currently serves as Chief of Staff for Customer Service at DTE Energy. Yvette is also a mentor in the Women for Tomorrow program and works with students at the David Aerospace Technical High School. We are so pleased to welcome Police Commissioner Evette Griffie and look forward to her remarks. Yvette, please take it over.
Thank you. As Jim mentioned, I'm Police Commissioner for District 2, and I've been in that role for 2 years. District 2 is where I was born, where I attended K through 12 schools, and where I have lived the majority of my life. And so it means a lot to me, and I'm very honored to be able to serve my community in this position. I'm going to be brief in my remarks so that we can get to the Q&A, which I think is the meat of our time together today. But I just want to say that Detroiters want a police department that is fair, unbiased, and effective. And it sounds very basic, but as history shows, Detroiters cannot take these things for granted, as in many other places aside from Detroit as well. Detroiters also want a civilian oversight board as the main dedicated process and forum to account for fair, unbiased, and effective policing. Yes, we have a mayor, and we have 9 city council members and a police chief. But for 46 years now, the voters have backed a civilian board. And when voters challenged the board, they voted to add more community voices and more community power vested in the board, as in the number of elected seats that we now have. There are many strong components of the Detroit model for civilian oversight. And for today's panel, I think I'm going to just focus on 2. The first is that the board has a very strong and critical role as an independent recipient of police complaints, which allows for a log of complaints that are then approved or struck down by various police commissioners. The charter keeps the board in the civilian role to handle these civilian complaints, and these complaints can and do help identify gaps between policy and actual practice, and sometimes gaps in public understanding of some police procedures or shortcomings that the policies that the board can then address. The second component is really our weekly meetings, and this is worth highlighting because I think it provides a very important platform for information for the police to report directly to the people, and for the people to speak directly to the police chief and to top commanders. It is also the platform that makes reform possible on a regular basis. So we are acting and in charge as a community and not just reacting to what's happening. Again, I am honored to serve in this capacity to represent my community in such a time as this, when I think the importance of having community oversight is underscored by all of the recent events that we have witnessed. And unfortunately, yesterday's we heard about the incident in Kentucky with Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, too many to name. Too many that I feel terrible about having to name. But I think all of those incidents that are not new, but are just being highlighted in a time such as this, really underscore the importance of oversight and citizen oversight in the police department. Now, we may disagree or agree on how that should happen, but I think everybody wants the same thing, which is really effective community policing. So I will stop talking now so that we can have some time in Q&A and continue this robust discussion.
Yvette, thanks so much for those comments. I'd now like to recognize Tawana Petty. Tawana serves as director of the Data Justice Program for Detroit Community Technology Project and co-leads Our Data Bodies, a 5-person Black and Brown women and gender nonconforming led team concerned with the ways our community's digital information is collected, stored, and shared by government and corporations. She is a non-resident fellow with the Digital Society Lab at Stanford, a convening member of the Detroit Digital Justice Coalition, and a former fellow and current anti-racism facilitator at the Detroit Equity Action Lab. She is also a founding member and editorial board member of Riverwise magazine. We are so pleased to have Tawana Petty with us, and Tawana, please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. I am most presently here in a capacity similar to Commissioner Griffie as a lifelong Detroiter who is very committed to equity and justice within the city. And I've been attending quite regularly the Board of Police Commissioner meetings on a weekly basis, at least over the last 2 years. I used to attend more frequently in the past, but I've been attending quite recently, mostly regarding face recognition. And I want to put that on the agenda very early on because I think it is one of the examples where civilian oversight has failed the residents of the city. Judge Cohn, or Avern, talked about earlier how city council were the ones who voted in face recognition in the city. But the civilian oversight body had an opportunity then to rectify that situation. They were not brought into the fold of face recognition being implemented in a predominantly Black city when there is mounds of research to show that this technology is racially biased, that it misidentifies darker skin tones. We currently have 2 misidentification cases in Detroit, Michael Oliver and Robert Williams. And I wanna preface this situation because the civilian oversight body, knowing that this policy was put in place without their oversight, did not act in a way of a body who is exercising power. They then went in and voted in a policy allowing for a technology that had been used for almost 2 years without any policy in place. And that's just one example. Another example is the civilian oversight body meets in police headquarters. It feels as if it's a direct extension of law enforcement. And so I agree with Commissioner Griffie that civilian oversight is a significant importance to Detroiters, and Detroiters definitely want a body to represent their interests. But I don't believe that, and speaking as a Detroit resident myself, that having a civilian oversight body that is a direct extension of law enforcement is what we had in mind. And so until very recently, our chief of police was also our deputy mayor. So you're looking at an oversight body that has appointments from essentially the chief, as well as being housed in headquarters, as well as being housed in a real-time crime center headquarters. And so there are a lot of things that happen within the makeup of the civilian oversight that makes it very complicated to seek equity. And then the way the body is set up now is that community members don't really have a real opportunity to express their voices. We get anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes, depending on how many speakers there are, and there isn't a robust dialogue. The meetings in person, you're penalized and removed if you say something out of turn, even though the first 2 hours of the meeting can be used to have direct dialogue with law enforcement between the civilian oversight body and law enforcement. And so I think that the body is tremendously important. I think it needs to be strengthened. I think that every commissioner needs to be elected by the people. And I think that there needs to be a space for community members to have a more robust voice in determining how oversight is done over the department. And then I'll open up for questions.
Tawana, thanks so much for those comments. Okay, now we're going to move into the discussion and Q&A portion of the program. We have plenty of time to handle a lot of questions and get into a lot of specifics. And we've already got a number of interesting questions that have already been provided to us. I'm going to go with the very first one we've gotten. Tawana, I agree. We very much want to get into the issues that you were discussing. But I think let's start with this question, and then we can let the conversation roll as you wish. All of you wish. We have a question here that asking, some police departments allow their manual of operating procedures to be viewed by the public. Why doesn't Detroit allow the public to view this? I think I'll direct that to Yvette Griffey first, and then others may comment.
I don't believe that is true. Our policies are open. And as a matter of fact, anytime that we vote to approve or change policy, it's posted on our website for the community to weigh in on. So I'm not sure that that's accurate. I can tell you from experience, I recently worked very closely with colleagues on the commission to revise our use of force policy, which we can talk about today. And as a part of that process, we went to the community and sought their feedback. And so I'm not sure that that's entirely true.
Others have comments?
Yeah, some of the policies are online, and others there's months before they're online. And there are a lot of things that are not put online. So the way that it functions is the board secretary will announce what's been given to a commissioner. And a lot of times we don't know what's within those documents. We hear a line item. So we hear, commissioners, you were given this notification about this particular procedure or policy. It's in your packet. And then the residents never see that. So we don't even know what's being discussed or what's being debated about. And so that is the way I experience the commission. And so of course, I defer to Commissioner Griffie if there's some other location that some of these things need to be retrieved by the public from, because I don't receive those. And in addition, most recently, yeah, I will say the face recognition policy is a perfect example of some of the procedures that are uploaded. I wasn't able to find them until 6 months after the policy was in place, how they were using face recognition online. And it took a lot of protesting, or by protest, I mean people showing up at these meetings week after week asking, where are the records? Have you even asked Detroit police how they're using this technology? And then eventually there were these like one-pagers added to online for folks to see.
If I could just respond, I just want to say that all of our policies are open to, if people, so our staff works very hard to keep our website updated. Obviously, there are a lot of documents that we review just so that people have full context. This is an unpaid volunteer board, and I probably get about 20 emails per day as a commissioner. And so there are documents, some of which are privileged. I'm not sure if everyone is aware that the department has the ability to discipline officers, and those officers have the right to go into a closed session where those documents are not necessarily made available to the public. And so there are documents that are privileged and confidential for just board members. But if anybody at any moment would like to have access to policy, I encourage them, if it's not listed online, to reach out to our staff, who is more than happy and welcome to make sure that policy is available. There's nothing to be not transparent about. These are the policies that we vote on in public record, and I see no reason why they can't be made available to the public if they are not already.
So it sounds like there needs to be perhaps a better process to enable the public to see some of these documents, the documents they can see. Obviously, there are some that have to be held confidential, but it seems like there is at least a misalignment between information the public believes it is entitled to and is entitled to, and what they're actually finding.
Yeah, we encourage if there's some document that's not available, to reach out to our staff, who's very diligent about making sure that they get information out to the community. Because I receive correspondence from the community through our staff, so I know there's communication that is flowing through.
Avern, you had a comment.
As I listen to this, I have to wonder, 7 of the commissioners are elected by the people from 7 different districts. Now, I haven't followed the election campaign of any of the 7 who are elected from districts, but if you're dissatisfied with the way the commission is operating, it seems to me the citizens' remedy is not to vote for those commissioners the next time they're up for election. Citizens.
That brings up a very interesting question that we just got, Avern, and I want to put it to everyone. We have a question asking us, how does the vote for commissioners compare to the top of the ticket? In other words, what is the percentage of votes for commissioners compared, the percentage of the turnout, the number of people who go down the ballot to select somebody for the police commission versus the vote for, say, mayor or other items higher on the ballot. Does anybody know? I don't have that information.
Yeah. I mean, I would imagine that, unfortunately, a lot of elections, that the positions that are usually at the bottom of the ticket are not necessarily received as many votes as those at the top, but they are available. It's a very open, transparent process. In order to run for commission, you have to follow the same rules that you would follow to run for any other elected position through the clerk's office. And those names are put out there, candidates to do their research and make sure that they're selecting people that represent their interest.
Any other comments about that, Tawana? Do you happen to know anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that it's not like the board is made up of like perfect appointees versus imperfect elected officials. Like, I mean, honestly, a couple of the ones who were elected have been voting, in my opinion, more in line with the community needs around pervasive technologies. I will give Commissioner Griffie a lot of credit in pushing forward police reforms in the last several meetings, and even speaking out against face recognition, unfortunately voting in the wrong way, but you know, we've already had that debate. But I will say that I don't think that, you know, there's this kind of stigma to being elected versus appointed, and I think that it is I think it's wrong to look at community members as not being the ones who are the expertise of what they're experiencing. They're on the front lines of these biased technologies. They're on the front lines of when there's police brutality. They're on the front lines of having to deal with the policies that we're trying to advocate for. And if we're going to think about like appointments being like more qualified positions, then I would argue we need technologists and data scientists and people who understand some of the policies that the BOPC approves and implements, because one of the other issues that I'm seeing is that policies get approved that they don't really understand, and then there's no real oversight of those policies, and they basically just listen to what law enforcement says. So if law enforcement gets a good PR person and comes in and says something about face recognition, we could have had 10 people in the audience that are data scientists and technologists who've testified to these technologies, and that is completely ignored. And so I think that I want the civilian oversight body to have a great relationship with law enforcement, just as much as I want them to have a great relationship with community. But I think that the way that it is functioning now is almost like it's just the HR department of Detroit Police. And it's not, it doesn't feel like a civilian oversight body at all.
Can I just, oh, sorry.
I assume that when the department came to the Board of Commissioners to approve facial recognition software, the department was saying to the commissioners, with facial recognition software, we can do a more effective job in protecting the public from crime and criminal activity. Now, it's almost as if when we had World War II, if you let the public decide how much cannon power the Army can have, you have to rely on your professionals to determine what their needs are. There was a debate about it in front of the commissioners, and now there's a debate about it in front of the city council. And that is certainly no way to have an effective department who says, we need this technology to do our job. Now,
Yvette, let's hear from Yvette. What are your thoughts about how you make this, how do you balance this obvious need for, dealing with this technology, a lot of technical questions that need to be dealt with, but these are technologies that directly affect the daily lives of civilians, of citizens of the city.
Yeah, so I would just push back on a bit of what was said just now. You know, when you think about the kind of decision making that we have and the things that we use to make decisions, we have to listen to many sides. I mean, we just heard Senator Levin talk about making fact-based decisions that are, and it's never one party that you listen to more than the other. You take all of the facts and listen to them and try to make the best decision on behalf of your community. I can tell you that's what I do every time I come to the meeting. Every time I make a vote, I think about what is in the best interest of my community. So when you think about a program like facial recognition, I think there is a little bit of a misnomer. This policy, I do not I do believe, and I think there's no question that it has the potential to produce biased results. If you think about DNA evidence when it was first introduced and used back in the 80s, it was imperfect either. Technology very seldom tends to be perfect. However, I also see and witness as a member of the community and as the commission times where our police officers have to spend so much time being proactive and finding criminals who committed crimes than being reactive to find criminals or solve crimes that have already happened, instead of being reactive to be able to prevent crime from happening, right? And so that's what we have this issue where we have officers who are bogged down with cases trying to find out what happens so that they can get bad guys off the street. And so when you think about a technology like facial recognition, what we did as a commission was put rules to make it safer for the community. Anything that's left unguarded, that's not protected, that doesn't have rules around how it can be used, it can be dangerous. And so things we did that I think the public doesn't completely have full understanding of is we put rules. Like I've heard fallacies about there's cameras that are scanning people's faces in real time. That is not happening. Our policy demands that there's no FaceTime. There's no real-time use of facial recognition technology. There's reviews that have to happen before this technology can even be used. You cannot use it for offenses that are minor. It can only be used for people who commit or people who are alleged to commit violent offenses. So you have to murder someone. Someone has to be sexually assaulted. I mean, these are serious crimes that we have kind of boxed in the way this technology can be used to make it safer and more appropriate. I do not believe that facial recognition technology on its own will prevent crime. That's never been my stance. The reason that I voted for the technology, and I believe that my colleagues who voted alongside with me approve the use of the technology and approve how it be governed, is because we all felt that, and we all seen instances where this technology had the ability to reduce the time for people who had lost loved ones, mothers whose daughters had been killed, whose sons had been killed, coming to the commission saying, you still haven't found the person that committed my crime, or it took so long, it took way too long for you to solve this crime. And resources tied up in that process, that we said, how can we use technology to make this process more effective, but how can we govern it to make sure that it's safe so that bad incidents aren't happening, and it's not that we reduce the incidence of it potentially being biased. Now, I do want to address another thing that Ms. Petty brought up, which is that
let me give the others a chance to just respond to your comments, and then we'll come back to you. Tawana, or Avern,
Yes.
Either of you want to comment, and we'll come back to you with that.
Please let me comment. I appreciate Commissioner Griffey's benevolence of the Board of Police Commissioners, but I like to be clear that it took 6 months of protests inside of the police commissioner to amend that policy to have protections for the community. The contract that was signed with DataWorks Plus, which is now up for vote by City Council next week, for an amendment and extensions of the license, allow for real-time surveillance on drones, on body cameras, on mobile devices, on traffic cameras. I mean, they asked for everything under the sun to real-time surveil the public. It was the public that protested and got that policy was amended several times before we ended up with the policy that we have today. And if it wasn't for Georgetown Center for Privacy and Technology, we wouldn't even know that Detroit had face recognition. They used it for a year and a half with no policy in place under a standard operating procedure. And I'll just say something personally on my own behalf. I look outside my window every day to drones. I live in a city that is hyper surveilled, that has 2,000 green light cameras, that has traffic lights with license plate readers, that has drones, that has cell phone tracking, that's under federal government Operation Relentless Pursuit with agents on the ground. And crime has not been reduced. And so my question is, how does the civilian oversight body see approving all of these things, and City Council see approving all of these things and giving law enforcement literally the power to be military, as Avern said, on the ground in the city with no reduction of crime, very little reduction of crime, because there are a couple of instances that they'll quote that these areas have went down. But I would like to see a report that shows how crimes have been solved and transparency around which defendants have been locked up using face recognition, because I think that it's disingenuous to argue that this has served the community when we don't even know who it's being used on. We
So
don't even know, we
let
don't
me
have
break
that
in there.
information.
Let me just try to synthesize a little. So I think, Tawana's raising the issue to all of us here. Does the police commission obtain the data? Are there studies? Are we really paying attention to and gathering information about the effectiveness of the various technologies that are employed? What's the comment about that?
So we do. We have reporting. So let me just also state this, that the public, the commission is not a job a hat that I put on Thursdays at 3 o'clock and take off after the meeting. I'm a police commissioner Monday through Sunday. And I mentioned I get 20 emails a day, and in those emails, there are lots of information. We request things. We request data. We're overseeing. I ask for reporting. One of the things is that we put this technology and our governance process in place in September, as I think many who are in the legal field understand quite well, is the time it takes to prosecute from the time that you find a suspect can be a couple years. But we have demanded reporting around the effectiveness. We are monitoring it. We are watching to make sure I can tell you how many times we've used it in the last week. We have that information. And so there is oversight by the commission on this technology. It is not something, and let me just say, nobody is being, I can guarantee you, there's not a citizen today that is being tracked via a drone in this city by the police department. Now, maybe some other agency, but definitely not the police department. So that's using facial recognition technology via the drone. That's not happening. And so that's where I think we need to have conversation on what is factual and what's not factual, and come to the table. This information could be FOIA'd. This is not something that is kept in the dark. There's a dark secret room where malfeasance is happening. And I also want to just respond to another comment, if I may. I think one of the things that we also don't realize, that as commissioners, I'm a member of my community. I've been a member of this community for a long time. And what always baffles me is when we say the word community, it's as if like there's a silent majority that people that will never come to the police commission, but who have opinions and who are very active and avid voters. I have a neighbor who's a retired teacher, has been in the neighborhood for 30 years. She would never step foot in a police commission meeting. But in talking with her, she has a completely different perspective than many of the people that come to our meetings. And so when we use the word community, like Detroit is a monolith, where everybody has the same opinion on all the issues, I think that's just wrong. I can tell you, I hear various different opinions, some that side with Ms. Petty and others that don't. And so when we make decisions, I'm taking all of that into consideration, voices that are there on Thursdays and voices that are not.
So let me direct us to another question, just to keep us moving and have it enable us with limited time to cover a bunch of issues. Certainly the points made that the job of a commissioner and of the commission isn't just to take input during the commission meetings, the public meetings and so on. It is during other times, because that's very important to gather information from a broad array and diverse array of people in the city. I want to take a step back and speak more to the bigger issues of the commission. What do the three of you think? And I want to start with Avern. What do you think the most important priority of the police commission should be, given the very, very important issues, the critical issues that we're seeing unfold in our community and really across the country with respect to the use of violent tactics by the police? What should we be doing? I don't mean specifically what should the police commission do about a specific tactic, but I mean more broadly, do we have the right, is the commission organized the way it should be? Does it have the resources it needs in order to tackle issues that are so important, that people are marching in the streets and some people are giving their lives for?
Briefly, repeat exactly what you want me to comment on.
What does the police commission need to really focus on? What structural changes, if any, should we see in the police commission to enable it to tackle these really difficult issues?
Where there are policy decisions regarding the operation of the department, and those policy decisions are really implicated by the regulations. The police department has a manual that governs its regulation, governs its operation. For example, as I understand the use of excessive force policy prohibits the use of chokeholds by and large. The department has regulations. If the police commission should look at those regulations and decide which of them are inappropriate or too weak to regulate the conduct of a police department, you got to understand, a policeman is out there on the street trying to protect us. They live a life that exposes them to danger. For example, a policeman gets a call, there's a domestic dispute, it's a particular address. So he goes to that address as he approaches the door. There's always the possibility, unlikely, that he could be met with a shotgun blast. Now, how do you regulate that? You can't regulate that. They live a life constantly exposed to danger and trying to do an effective job of law enforcement.
Okay.
Occasionally, there are regulations that are too weak about something, and those regulations should be modified. But in the last analysis, the commission can't control the conduct of individual police officers on the beat performing their duties.
So even what I hear you saying, just to summarize, because I want to let others comment, what I hear you saying is that the police commission does not pay enough attention or could pay more attention to the actual manual that governs the behavior of police officers.
It can establish regulations to govern the operation of police officers. But in the last analysis, it can't walk the street with an officer to see whether or not he's following the regulation.
Okay. Tawana, I want to bring this to you. What do you think structurally would make the police commission more effective in dealing with these really important and very, very high, hot button and very, very, issues that are life and death?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I want to say that I think that I want to preface my statement with saying I think it's a mistake to have this kind of narrative that folks who want a strong oversight body and who want equity in the city is somehow like against police officers and don't understand the threats that they face on the street. I think within any institution within the history of this country, there was protest and there was agitation to make institutions more equitable, and the police are not excluded from that. And so I think that we've created a culture in society where if you respond and you demand equity within law enforcement, you're somehow like on the other end of humanity. And I think that that's foul. I think we're sitting on the heels of a Breonna Taylor case where the people who murder her in her bed in her home aren't even being brought to justice. And we have to have strong civilian if we're gonna have civilian oversight, it has to have power. And I think that if it's not gonna have power to bring about justice for these types of harms, then we can't pretend that we have an oversight body. And so structurally within Detroit specifically, I would say they need to move out of police headquarters. The civilian oversight body should not be an extension of police headquarters. And to comment on community members not showing up at the meetings, well, until very recently, which again, due to protests and written letters, we had to swipe IDs and to come into the real-time crime center headquarters. You should not have to do that to come to a public community meeting to give your grievances of police. Imagine if you were brutalized by an officer, you have to come into police headquarters to air your grievance to the civilian oversight body. Those are the sort of things that are happening in the city that prohibit an equitable infrastructure to allow for more people to feel safe in getting the type of justice that they seek.
Okay, Yvette, I'd love your comments. Thanks.
So just to the most recent comment. So first of all, the police officers don't have private buildings. They're paid for by tax dollars, and they are community buildings. So I think one of the things I want to point out is that, in my view, this is an opportunity for community and police to come together, and that building is not owned by the police department. We all pay tax dollars for the building.
Right, but I don't want to go to the police building to air my grievance about police.
I also want to add that once a month, we have a community meeting that's held not in any police building. It's usually held in rec centers, it's held in schools, auditoriums, gymnasiums, where we actually have, that's where we have the most people participating in their meetings. So when I go to those community meetings once a month at 6 o'clock in the evening so that people can come after work, that's where we have a lot of very robust dialogue about what's happening. And those meetings until recently with COVID, when we took them online, are happening in the community. But I really want to go back to, I think, the original question, which really was around regulation and the importance of us. And I completely agree, that's spot on. That is where the sweet spot and where we tried to focus in the last, especially over the last 6 months, with the awakening that's happening in this country, is really focusing on what policies can we change. I mean, we just think, like in the last 6 months ago in Detroit, it was okay for an officer, or there was no policy against it, but there was an officer to watch another officer use excessive force and say nothing and not intervene. What happened to George Floyd, where you had 4 officers who stood back and watched this man be murdered, if it happened here, them watching, would have been okay until the police commission took onus on itself to revise and push the department to enact different policy, to enact different policy. Today, that is a policy. Each officer has a duty to intervene. We talked about the ban on chokeholds. We talk about protecting vulnerable members of our community and how we have to be careful and not use same levels of force with them. So there's a very important policy. Now we're talking about things like no-knock warrants, right? We're really trying to focus on what regulations can we put in place that will govern how police officers behave when they are in the community. The second thing that I wanted to talk about, and I think has not been discussed enough, and it's not just a problem in Detroit, but it's a problem with oversight across the nation, is the impact that arbitration has on our decisions. A commissioner today can vote to discipline an officer, to remove an officer. I'm sorry, but if that officer goes through an arbitration process and it's decided by an arbitrator that's not selected by the community, that officer can then be placed back into the police department. So there are some instances where the commission there's no bearing on the commission. We have done everything we can do to try to protect the community from that officer. But here you have case law and federal laws that mandate and require us to basically usurps our authority. And so those are things that I think we need to talk about as a nation. It's not just happening in Detroit, it's happening all over the country.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to interject. Are those, the requirement for arbitration, is that something that's in the union contract with the?
Yes, it's contract law, which is final and binding, and has the ability to usurp a charter. And that's why we have officers where you've seen cases where we have not approved a promotion, but the officer, the arbitrator comes in and the officer is placed back into that position and we have no say, and there's nothing that we can do. So those are the types of things that I think are prohibiting us from even doing our jobs. I think we do need to focus on policy. I think we need to take a look at what's happening and survey the landscape and say, what are the things that we have the authority to enact? And I think that policy piece has been a big role. And for me, has been a big, as a loan commissioner, has been something that I've been personally focused on trying to do over the last 6 months.
Let me pick up where the conversation has been going, because I want to bring in a question that came from the audience involving looking at police commissions or civilian oversight of police departments around the country. And I don't know, Tawana, if you've done some looking at this, or Avern or Yvette, but do any of you have anything to say about approaches that are taken in other cities that have civilian oversight that we might want to emulate here in Detroit?
I can tell you that Detroit has one of the strongest police oversight models in the country. That is a fact.
Tawana, what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, it's an unfortunate fact. I have to agree and slightly diverge from Commissioner Griffey's statement. Detroit is 50 years in the future. A lot of places around the world are struggling to get to where Detroit is regarding having a civilian oversight body. But that's just the narrative of what a body can be. It is not the actual praxis of how civilian oversight bodies operate. And so, a lot of ways we're in the future, and a lot of ways we're behind. I mean, Just to briefly bring up face recognition again, 13 cities have banned it, and they're all predominantly white. And these are places where the technology accurately identifies white people. Like face recognition accurately identifies white people, and these communities said, we don't want it. It's a violation of our civil liberties. We don't want to be tracked and surveilled and targeted. And they're rapidly continuing to issue bans all across the country. And yet in the predominantly Black city, where every report has identified, even NIST has identified that face recognition misidentifies darker skin tones, in addition to our own chief who said, of 500 cases, only 130 brought back a match, but of those 130, then we had an analyst. So that means almost 400 were misidentifications, and we're relying on an analyst to then say, oh, well, of these 130, then this is the person. That's a lot of ownership. We talk about police officers being stressed and having ownership of trying to identify people who committed crimes. But now we're asking an analyst to identify hundreds of images that a technology is automatically going to misidentify hundreds of people and have them pick out the right person. And now, not just for the crimes like the one Michael Oliver and Robert Williams was misidentified for, which was like a watches and a cell phone, but we're talking about for murder. So you're talking about people potentially sitting in jail for murder, waiting to be exonerated by a faulty algorithm. And I'll just finally say this isn't just the argument for Detroit. Every single person in the state of Michigan who's taken a state ID since 1999 is in this database. That means you are being flipped through every time they're looking for somebody to pin a crime on. And so I just really want us to understand that we're in a virtual perpetual lineup every single day of our lives. While this technology is
let me probe that a bit. Then there has been mention of the limit of the relatively new policy on facial recognition that does limit the instances when it can be used, establishes some additional oversight requirements within the department as far as having its use restricted to certain kinds of crimes and certain instances, as well as with supervision. Tawana, is that enough? Yvette, I hear you saying that it sounds like that's progress, but yeah. Tawana, are you saying that more needs to be done? And if so, what specifically would you want to see?
I'm saying a ban needs to be in place. No, that's definitely not enough. It is tremendous progress. It means that now, officers can't swipe the crowd at protests and automatically identify protesters using face recognition, which they could do prior to the policy being in place under the DataWorks Plus contract. In Baltimore, under the Freddie Gray protest, that's exactly what officers did. They went into the crowd, they took their cell phones, they panned over the crowd, and they picked up people for tickets. And so we don't want to create that type of culture in Detroit. And so I'm not saying officers in Detroit are doing that now, but if we leave this across the globe, they've shown there's no department that hasn't shown to misuse this technology. I don't think that Detroit is just going to be the benevolent society that's going to somehow avoid the temptation that every other law department across the country has already fallen into.
I was make a comment on this. I think the amount of time that this panel is devoted to facial recognition software and whether or not the department should use it or not use it suggests to me that by and large, the department is doing a pretty good job, because I haven't heard from the other two panelists incidents or anecdotal evidence of misbehavior by police officers.
Yeah, and that's what I was actually going to say the same thing myself. I mean,
I literally just named two cases.
When I think about the instances that are top of mind for me right now and what, my focus is right now and personally, and I think a lot of the other commissioners would agree with me when I say this is, when I think we're talking about Sandra Bland, we're talking about George Floyd, we're talking about Eric Garner, we're talking about things that have happened in other places where facial recognition technology was not the culprit at all. We're talking about what happens when an officer encounters somebody on the streets. And I'm not to say that facial recognition technology is not an important policy, but that is much broader than facial recognition technology. We need to think of, to me, I do think we've spent a substantial amount of time talking about the facial recognition technology, which does not touch the majority of citizens in this city. What does? How an officer is approach someone when they need to use force. What happens should an officer be able to use a weapon and pull it out on that? To me, it has much more opportunity to impact someone's daily life than this technology that I really strongly believe is governed in a way that will protect and keep citizens safe. And since it's been in place, so I don't understand. I think that we need to think about what's happening in the world today. How do we train our officers to have sensitivity in our communities? I mean, those are the things that keep me up at night. When I have, how do we work with the community to understand how else to prevent crime? It's not only the police officer's job to prevent crime. This is a community conversation that the police should be involved in, but it should not be led by the department necessarily. And so these are the kinds of things that keep me up at night. And I think when I think about systemic issues, there's so many places that we could go, and I just want to call that out.
That's very, very helpful.
Can I just,
sure,
sorry,
go ahead.
Can I just briefly say, I think minimizing the impact of face recognition is dangerous. Surveillance is the reason why police officers interact with the public, whether it be somebody calling someone on an officer because they were watching someone or using the technology. We are rapidly moving into a situation where these things will be automated and there will be algorithms. We don't want to wait until a year from now when most of these decisions are being made by a technology, and technology is sending law enforcement out to communities to then prioritize it as an issue. And I'll finally say, we've been saying for years that the way you reduce crime in the community is to resource communities. You don't over-police already marginalized communities in poverty. During COVID-19, Detroit lost 1,500 people. Our median income was $29,000 at pre-COVID-19. Since then, almost 40% of the residents have lost their jobs. The solution is not bringing in more federal agents, bringing in more surveillance, bringing in more ways to criminalize and penalize community. We need resources in the neighborhoods if we're going to prevent the crime that you're talking about.
And I would agree
with quality of life.
I think there's a lot of excellent points being made here. I want to bring more questions in from the audience. One of those questions is a question about where do the reforms that are adopted come from? An audience member is raising a question that a lot of the reforms that the police commission adopts are ones that were brought to them by the police department as opposed to coming from members of the community or from activists in the community. Do you think that's the case?
I think there are quite a bit of policy that the police come to us and recommend changes, but there's also, I just mentioned the use of force policy, which was a big deal. That was literally the commission and our staff working on policy and saying, this is what we're going to be recommending. Let's work together to see, how we can pass this. And that was not at all brought forth by the police department. That was the community and the commission working together to make that happen. There also are policies where I talked about our complaints. We, monitor complaints, we dig deep into complaints, and we use that data to make a recommendation back and forth. So it's a two-way process. There are times when the department does make recommendations, but so do we.
Tawana, what are your thoughts? Are the reforms basically coming from the department or not?
I mean, I would be remiss. Like I lifted up Commissioner Griffie earlier. I've been there every week. I heard her be very vocal about the need to put forward some of these reforms. And so I'm an equal critiquer and complimenter. So, I mean, I do believe that there are a lot of policies that are put forward and pushed against by law enforcement. We deal with that in city council, as well as the charter, as well as the BOPC. But that particular policy that she's lifting up, I do know and witness that she was very heavy-handed in pushing that forward. So there are a lot of policies that I would say, is very heavy-handed law enforcement. I can't particularly say the most recent reforms are one of them.
We are now beginning to run out of time, and I want to leave enough time for Peter Hammer to give some closing remarks. I do want to say that one of the issues, and we really don't have time to get into it, is really the resourcing of the police commission. It is a difficult, I think by all accounts, a very difficult job to do, particularly when you're a volunteer and it's clearly a part-time activity, even though it is one that, when done right, has to be taken home. So I think we're all nodding our heads about that. I think it's an issue, and I think in future conversations, reforms that look at how we can bring more resources to the police commission so it can do its job, it seems to me might be part of the solution.
Absolutely.
I agree with that.
Well, let me just thank you all. I'm going to turn it over to Peter Hammer, who's going to take us home and give concluding remarks. Peter, take it away.
Thanks, Jim. I'm just going to just say, wow, what a great panel, what a great moderation. So I'm going to start with thanks. Thank you and the Levin Center for great moderation and help. Thank Judge Cohn, and it's always going to be Judge Cohn to me, sir. Thank Yvette Griffie. Thank Tawana Petty, who is one of my colleagues at the Detroit Equity Action Lab and always an inspiration to me and the amazing work that she does. And I just want to raise up two phrases that were said. That we're in some tension with each other, but I think we need to sit with tension, or at least learn how to sit with tension. One was Tawana's comment saying that we in Detroit, and I take very great pride on this, are 50 years in the future, all right? And what we have in terms of a potential for civilian oversight in Detroit really is what other people are looking towards us to. And I'll contrast that with Judge Cohen's statement that it was a burdensome impertinence. And we can kind of see that there are different angles that different people can take. But when I hear language like burdensome impertinence, I view that as an invitation to some good trouble, as John Lewis would be saying. Things are not perfect. And I think we would all agree that this amazing charter, this gift that we were given in 1974, has not reached its potential. And Ed Littlejohn, who was on the first commission, has told me that personally in recent weeks. But it doesn't mean that we give up on it. And I want to kind of call into the room the historic moment that we really are sitting in, and why we need to have commissions and civilian oversight, and dare I say democracy, as part of the solution to how we envision these social problems. We can think about George Floyd and all the other names that we have heard really as the accumulation of 400 years of oppressive behavior and social control directed at African Americans. We can look at the health disparities that are coming out of the COVID crisis, which are incredibly racialized, as further revealing the curtain coming away and looking at the structural inequalities that have defined this country since its inception. And we can also see that we're being called on to really ask fundamental questions about what are real sources of safety, right? So what are real sources of safety? And I would say by the time we get to the police, it's way too late, right? That's downstream, that's not upstream. And there may be roles for the police, there may be transitions out of what we currently have, but we've got to start asking that question. And when we ask that question, and I think about the Detroit Board of Police Commission, I think about their traditional mission, and they have an important traditional mission to make sure that this incredibly important, what some people call a monopoly on the use of violence in our society, exercised through the police, is used appropriately and is not abused, right? But I would also call out or call into the room this notion that we have to have a conversation about a transformative mission for the Detroit Police Commission. That would require some changes in the charter. That would require hopefully getting rid of appointments, in my own opinion. Because I think at the end of the day, what we really have to say is what's the answer to what's ailing the commission? It's the deficit of democracy that defines Detroit, right? It's the legacy of emergency management that actually put a big X through the Detroit Police Commission. It's a movement away of so many of our authorities rather than democracies, a Great Lakes Water Authority, a land bank authority, a lighting authority that really is removing democracies from our processes. So when you say, well, what happens when the commission fights up against the police? What happens when it fights up against the mayor? It's their responsibility from this day moving forward to create their own democratic constituency in the city, to educate the public about the important role that they play, to advocate for appropriate structural reforms, and to create positive relationships with members of the community, so the commission knows when they're in a power fight with the mayor or the police department, that the people have their back. Right? That would be the sort of aspiration I would say people try to vision about, and then say once we're visioning about that, how do we make that in practice? So again, I'm going to end with thanks and gratitude. Really a wonderful discussion, not easy issues, no silver bullets, no one answer, but a really robust discussion. And that's really what we have to start, and we have to then move forward. So Jim, you want to close it out?
I'll just say those were fantastic remarks, Peter. You captured and synthesized what was said and some things that would need to be said. This is not the end of this conversation. I just want to say that this conversation was made incredible by Tawana and Yvette and Avern. You and Carl, we appreciate all of your contributions and your continued work and your passion for this, and we will be with you in trying to explore how we can take really a commission that is ahead of a lot of other cities in this country to an even higher level. Thank you all. Thank you to our audience, and we appreciate being with you, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.